Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Hass and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. In the mid-80s, DeMatteis was given the go-ahead by Marvel to tell a story about Kraven the Hunter, who is one of Spider-Man's villains, killing Spider-Man and taking over his role. Eventually he realises he can't be that hero and the position switched back. And Kraven's last hunt is interesting for quite a number of reasons actually, but the first time I read this comic, one thing stood out to me in the first issue. It builds a sense of slow, quiet dread very effectively, and it's not something that's seen a lot. And so when I say creating dread, I specifically want to look at these recurring panels here, and this takes place in Web of Spider-Man number 31, entitled The Coffin. There's a handful of these panels, and the first comes at the bottom of page 3 here. They all take up the same size in this thin row on each of the pages that they get rendered on. Visually, they're incredibly simple. They depict one action, that of this henchman of Kraven's digging a grave. They contain no dialogue, only this shuck sound effect of the shovel digging up the dirt. The pile in the background gets bigger in each panel, and the henchman ends up deeper and deeper into the ground. For a bit of pathetic fallacy, it's also raining. I mean, you know, why not? And as I say, there's not much to these panels at all, but the simplicity belies their real motive and how clever they are as a construct of this story. The first panel shows up here on this page. We've just been given an establishing introduction of Kraven the Hunter, his power, his rage, the fact he's a beast. Look at the colouring and the framing of these panels in the pages. I mean, it's all in your face, over the top, and predominantly all focused on Kraven. There's a heavy use of pink and saturated colours by Sharen and Jackson, which builds something up that comes crashing down in this final panel of the sequence. And if you look at this page in its entirety, you can see how odd and removed that final panel is. It seems to be intentionally jarring to us as a reader, because it doesn't blend in with everything else we're being shown, and this is further backed up by the captioning and narration. If you see in the previous panel, the narration says, "I am Kravenov," and it adds those two dashes. This is telling us the sentence isn't finished, it'll be carried on in the next caption box. But that caption box doesn't arrive, instead what we get is this grave digging panel. If you look at page 1, this big splash, it has a similar caption, "I am Kraven," the two dashes lead us to turn the page and read -- the beast. That's a standard comics narrative technique to get you to turn a page, but still be involved in the story. Turn the page to see what happens at the end of the sentence, and it can also work panel to panel as seen here with these ellipses. So when DeMatteis and Zeck instead give us this panel, after telling us we're being led to the next bit of narration, they are intentionally throwing us off and out of the story. It's not logically the next image in this sequence of events we've already been shown. So by doing that, they ask us to focus on it. And there's a lot to draw out of that. It could be just the impending death of a character, see how suddenly it can arrive, can cut you off mid-sentence, it's waiting around the corner, and that will resonate later with the story and what happens with Spider-Man. And then you turn the page and the story just sort of continues, almost as if the panel was never even there in the first place. It's not acknowledged, we just move on. So you have to assume that these panels are serving a bigger function than just showing you something happening off screen. The obvious point to compare it to is something akin to Watchmen's clock, this time ticking down to the end of the comic, where we see the images of Kraven putting Spider-Man into a coffin. The henchman digging is DeMatteis' way of telling you it's creeping closer. And again, the second time we see this panel, it does actually a similar function. This time it's a scene with Spider-Man's narration, not Kraven's, and again the image just comes out of nowhere. It's not directly linked to the rest of the scene, and the next page just carries on as though that panel never even existed. It brings up a point about the issue of pages and page turns in a comic. When you as a reader have to turn a page, it's something that will naturally take you out of the story and break the suspension of disbelief. So when DeMatteis is purposefully stopping the narrative to show you this panel, and the fact Zeck has it all the way across the page, they are purposefully saying something else is happening. Remember this panel specifically because the rest isn't as important. They wouldn't stop you from being emotionally carried through the rest of the narrative being presented otherwise, and it's halting for a reason. A couple of pages later we get the third use of the panel and it works exactly the same. There's an added emphasis here, because if we look at what Spider-Man says immediately before this panel, he's talking about being human and being fragile, and once again the silent gravedigger interrupts him and us. Notice too how the colours still don't match the previous panel, so it still sits apart. We don't see it for a while after that until it crops up again 13 pages in. Now, this is where it starts to get even more interesting because this page both begins and ends with these panels, and the rest of the page actually begins to match the panel. It's raining, the sky is turning purple, and the saturation of the colours begins to sort of line up. When I mentioned about the ticking clock effect, we're now allowed to understand where this grave panel fits in with the rest of the story. It must be happening around now. The grave panel was the inevitable ending of this story, and that's then backed up by, while not a direct address, a very heavily leaned upon one, with the last caption of the penultimate panel being, "So why am I so sure that something's out there, that something's waiting for me?" In terms of the actual unfolding story, that dread is Kraven, who's about to shoot Spider-Man with a dart in this scene, but obviously it's also addressing this foreboding from the grave digging. And the final time we see the panel is page 19. Kraven shoots Spider-Man and we see this blam panel, and then black, then the grave, with the digger deep enough down to indicate indicate the grave is ready to be filled by a body. Again, the 4 panels at the top of this page visually match the grave panel, which helps establish where we are. That row of 3 panels is such a fantastic use of a page too. The grave has become, at this point, a recurring visual, and so the bland black grave sequence works in a couple of ways. One, if you look at it on its own, you could see that as a sequence of gunshot death burial, but we're acutely aware of the fact that this grave panel is now established to sit outside of the regular images on the page. DeMatteis and Zeck have already sort of established that, which cleverly allows them to subvert this at this final panel, because when you turn the page, you realize that actually it's established the scene that we're into now. Remember earlier I talked about how page turning is a jarring effect, and so often creators find a way to minimize that by linking dialogue or captions or imagery. We saw how they broke that effect earlier, but now they trick you and they actually build it across this page, as the next page takes you to the graveyard area. And it's obvious because the pink prevails in the sound effects, the green and blue are clearly visible along with that rain. And by doing this, DeMatteis and Zeck have kept you gliding through these final few pages, which increases the emotional impact and response by not jarring you out of the story this time. They've made that final set of pages of Spider-Man getting shot and then buried much more impactful because they've been stopping your investment previously, and now they let you sail all the way through uninterrupted. It may look like 6 panels of the same background with a henchman digging a grave, and it may seem fairly obvious at first glance, well obviously he's digging Spider-Man's grave, sure. But actually, the work going into these panels is more than just the obvious piece of subtext. As with a lot of the team's work in this issue, there's layers. This is everything from the simplicity of the rendering by Zeck, the clever colours work by Sharen and Jackson, and the plotting of the beats by DeMatteis. It's a truly clever conceit and often overlooked. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying Strip Panel Naked and the videos, you might want to check out our Patreon, where we offer reading lists, additional analysis, and full comic breakdowns that go along with each video topic. You can find it at patreon.com/strippanelnaked. Thanks.